Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine this. Nearly 4 out of every 10 teenage girls might be, running on empty when it comes to iron. That's according to some really interesting research that just came out of southern Sweden. 38%. I mean, it really makes you think about the young women in your life, doesn't it?
It really is.
Why is this happening? And, what does it actually mean for their health, their well-being?
And what's great here is that we're not just speculating. We've got a recent health news piece from April and also a really detailed scientific paper published in the European Journal of Nutrition. They're both looking at the same study, so it gives us a pretty solid foundation.
Exactly. A solid base. And what really jumped out at me from these sources was this connection, this link between what these teenagers were eating, whether they eat everything or avoid meat, maybe just eat fish, or they're vegetarian, vegan, and how much iron they actually have.
The dietary pattern.
It seems like our food choices, they have a much bigger impact on iron than maybe we realize sometimes.
Definitely.
So our mission for this deep dive, really, is to get to grips with how common iron deficiency is in teenage girls, especially those maybe cutting back on meat, and figure out some clear, evidence-based ways to keep iron levels healthy without getting totally overwhelmed.
Sounds like a plan. So this research, fundamentally, it aimed to see if there really was a link between these different ways of eating, omnivore, pescatarian, vegetarian, vegan, and the iron levels in teenage girls there in southern Sweden. And they also wanted to see if, how much of different types of food they ate played a role.
Okay, so how did they actually do it? What was the method?
Well, the researchers got nearly 500 female high school students involved from 2 cities.
500? Okay.
Yeah, quite a few. And these young women filled out detailed questionnaires about their eating habits over the past year.
Like what kinds of things?
Everything, really. What they ate, how often, also whether they took any iron supplements, some general background stuff, and, importantly, questions about their periods.
Ah, okay. Menstruation.
Exactly. And crucially, they took blood samples from all of them.
Right.
And they looked at ferritin and hemoglobin levels. You can think of ferritin as like your body's iron storage tank.
Okay, the reserves.
Precisely. And hemoglobin is the protein in red blood cells that carries the oxygen around. Low levels of either suggests a problem, ranging from just depleted stores right through to actual iron deficiency anemia.
And they had a specific cutoff.
Yes. They defined iron deficiency as having a ferritin level below 15 micrograms per liter. 15, that was sort of the critical threshold they used.
Okay. Below 15, your stores are too low.
Yeah, too low to function optimally. That was the idea.
Right. So they got this picture of diet, supplements, periods, and then measured the actual iron. What were the big takeaways, the main results?
Well, the results, they really showed a stark contrast across the different diet groups. The teenage girls who ate everything, the omnivores, they had the highest average iron storage. But what was really striking, almost 70%. 70.
70% of who?
Of the vegetarians and vegans in the study. They had low iron stores below that 15 threshold.
Wow. Nearly 7 out of 10. That's huge.
That is huge. Pescatarians, so those eating fish but not other meat, they also showed a significantly higher rate, around 49%.
Still high compared to the omnivores.
Yeah, much higher. The omnivores were around 30%, so still significant, but much lower than the other groups. Even those who just avoided red meat had a higher likelihood of being iron deficient.
So less red meat seemed to correlate pretty strongly.
It did. The study found that the less red meat the girls ate, the higher their risk of iron deficiency. And interestingly, they also saw that eating more vegetarian patties and things like lentils and beans, that was also linked to a greater risk.
Wait, eating more veggie patties and beans was linked to higher risk. That sounds counterintuitive. Aren't they supposed to be good iron sources?
Well, yeah, that's the interesting part. It doesn't necessarily mean those foods cause the problem.
Ah, okay.
Instead, the researchers think it might be about the overall dietary pattern. If you're lacking that easily absorbed heme iron from animal sources.
Right, the type our bodies grab onto easily.
Exactly. Then maybe the body struggles to utilize the non-heme iron, the plant-based type, from those patties and legumes as efficiently. It highlights that just adding iron-rich plant foods isn't always the whole story.
So it's about bioavailability.
Yeah.
How much we can actually use. and the whole diet context.
Precisely. The context matters a lot.
That's a really critical point. It's not just nutrients in isolation. The article also mentioned periods,
Yep.
monthly blood loss. How big a factor was that?
Absolutely huge. The study confirmed that heavy menstrual bleeding, which they figured out from the questionnaires, was a significant contributor to low iron across all the groups.
Not just the vegetarians or vegans.
No, across the board. Girls who reported heavier periods were just more likely to have insufficient iron regardless of diet.
Makes sense. Losing blood means losing iron. And what about supplements? Did taking extra iron help those groups?
So they did ask about supplement use, and they found vegetarians and vegans were more likely to be taking iron supplements.
As you might expect.
Right. But even with that extra iron, the study still showed that, on average, those non-meat eaters had lower iron levels compared to the omnivore girls.
Huh. So even supplementing didn't fully bridge the gap in this study group.
It seems not, on average anyway. It suggests that just popping a pill might not be the complete fix. We also really need to think about absorption from food, like we were saying.
Okay, so this gives us a clearer picture of who's potentially more at risk. But like any study, it has limits, right? Things you need to keep in mind.
Oh, definitely. That's always important. Firstly, this was done in southern Sweden.
Right. One specific place.
Exactly. So while we might expect similar trends elsewhere, and we do see them, the exact percentages might differ. You know, the news article mentioned U.S. data showing around 17% of girls aged 12-21 with low iron stores.
Okay, lower than the 38% overall here, but still significant.
Right. And an earlier European study found about 26%. So low iron is definitely widespread, but the specific prevalence varies.
Good point.
What else? Another thing is, well, it relied on the girls reporting what they ate. Self-reported dietary data.
Which can be tricky. People forget or maybe don't estimate portion sizes perfectly.
Exactly. It's not always perfectly accurate. And also, iron deficiency tends to creep up slowly, doesn't it?
Yeah, you might not notice symptoms right away.
Right. So the participants might not have even felt anything was wrong until they got tested for the study.
Okay, so context is key. Location, self-reporting, slow onset.
Got it. And what about the wider scientific view? What do experts generally say about this kind of thing?
Well, there's pretty broad agreement among scientists that heme iron, the type from animal foods, especially red meat, is just much more easily absorbed by our bodies.
Compared to the non-heme iron from plants? Correct. So experts often talk about needing public health strategies that, encourage balanced diets, thinking about both nutrition and environmental sustainability, which is a tricky balance sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
And many also suggest that maybe regular screening, checking iron levels, especially in high-risk groups like teenage girls, could be really beneficial.
Proactive checks.
Yeah. And the researchers themselves, the ones who did this study, they also point out that while, yes, supplements are often needed if someone is diagnosed with deficiency, we also have to focus on boosting absorption from food. Dietary strategies are crucial too.
Right. Okay, so bring this all together.
Yeah.
What does it mean for people listening, for us, for the young people we know? What should we be thinking about?
Well, if you're a teenage girl listening, I think the main message is to just be aware of this. Be mindful of your iron levels, especially if you have heavy periods or if you follow a diet that limits or cuts out meat entirely.
And pay attention to symptoms.
Definitely. Pay attention to how you feel. Things like, ongoing fatigue, trouble concentrating, maybe feeling down or low mood. Those could be signs. Doesn't mean they always are, but they could be.
Worth being aware of.
Absolutely. And if you're a parent or, teenage girls, this research really underscores how important it is to have open conversations. About diet, about their periods, which can sometimes be an awkward topic, but it's important, and about any symptoms they might be having.
Yeah, opening that dialogue.
And really, for everyone, whatever your diet, it's a good reminder about, the importance of a balanced intake, understanding what your body needs. Plant-based diets can be super healthy.
They need planning.
Exactly. They require some knowledge and careful planning to make sure you're getting enough of everything, including iron, and crucially, that your body can actually use it well.
Okay, so let's talk practicalities. What are some concrete, evidence-based things people can actually do to help with iron intake, especially if you're eating more plant-based?
Yeah, good question. The researchers highlighted several key things based on general nutritional science. First, obviously, include those iron-rich plant foods.
Like what?
Things like whole grains, lentils, beans, chickpeas, tofu, and dark leafy greens like spinach and kale. Even if you eat meat, A lot of daily iron comes from these plant sources anyway.
Right, good foundation.
Second, and this is key, help your body absorb that non-heme iron. Pair those iron-rich plant foods with things high in vitamin C.
Okay, vitamin C, examples.
Oranges, strawberries, bell peppers, broccoli, tomatoes. Eating them at the same meal helps a lot. Also, natural acids can help. Think citrus juices, vinegar dressings, even fermented foods like sauerkraut.
Oh, interesting. Fermented foods, too.
Yeah, and even the fermentation process itself, like in making sourdough bread, can actually break down some of the compounds called phytates that block iron absorption.
Right.
So that makes the iron more available.
Sourdough bread, who knew? Okay, what else? Anything to avoid?
Yes. Be mindful of things that hinder absorption. The big ones are tea and coffee.
Ah, the tannins.
Exactly. The tannins and polyphenols in them can really significantly reduce how much iron your body takes in from a meal. So try to avoid drinking tea or coffee with your meals. Maybe have them an hour or two before or after instead.
That's really practical advice. Include the good stuff, pair it with vitamin C, maybe think about fermentation, and separate your tea and coffee from meals.
That's a pretty good summary, yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's maybe the final thought you'd want to leave our listeners mulling over?
A final thought. I think it's about stepping back and considering this balance. How do we support this important shift towards more sustainable, plant-forward eating,
Right.
which is good for the planet,
Right.
while also making absolutely sure that the specific nutritional needs of groups who might be more vulnerable, like teenage girls dealing with growth spurts and menstruation, are truly being met.
How do we make sure good intentions don't lead to accidental problems?
Exactly. How do we ensure that these well-intentioned dietary choices don't inadvertently lead to deficiencies in really vital nutrients like iron? It's a big question, I think, for individuals, for families, and maybe even for public health policy, too.
A really important question to keep asking. Thanks for breaking that down.
My pleasure. It's important stuff.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.